Welcome back to the Mindful Masculinity podcast. I don't know if it's a podcast because I'm not on a regular cadence, like a weekly or a monthly cadence. But when I do meet someone, typically on Substack, and that individual piques my interest because they demonstrate a phenomenal way of writing, someone who can articulate themselves in a powerful way that somehow reaches me. And it's different with every writer. Someone who is on this journey in life that is much more mindful, and someone who kind of gets it when it comes to masculinity. And Stephen Bradford Long is one of those men. His writing is phenomenal. If you're not subscribed to him, he articulates things in sometimes an extremely sarcastic and humorous way, very often in a very touching way that draws me in. That I just adore his writing. But I also adore about this man's soul is that he really does want to have those kinds of conversations that are much more meaningful. They're not the superficial stuff you get on Substack or any place else where, it's an aphorism somebody throws out and you repost it because it's catchy. And 12 people are going to like it. What I love about Stephen is he's talking about things that are so vulnerable and personal and trying to both express himself, but I think engage in a conversation. And so, Stephen, thank you for joining me today. I do feel honored that I get this time with you. Before we go into our discussion about masculinity, how much do you want to sort of position yourself in terms of your story, your narrative?
So first, thank you so much for the kind words, and I am likewise honored to be here with you. I think you're awesome. I've really enjoyed your work on Substack. Yeah, I mean, I have been almost pathologically open on Substack about my journey and about my inner life. And so I'm happy to continue that trend here in this conversation. Yeah.
So what you and I have been talking about leading up to this is, this difficulty of trying to come up with our own personal definitions of achievable masculinity for ourselves. How have you come to the point in your life where this is important to you and you're feeling like you need to put some more flesh on these bones? What sort of gotten you to this point as a catalyst?
I think a wrinkle in my journey is that I'm gay. And I was raised in a pretty conservative Christian household and setting, right? And so kind of from the get-go, the masculine scripts here in Appalachia, here in Christian Southern culture, evangelical Southern culture, from the get-go, I couldn't adopt them, or I was a round peg fitting in a square hole. And so I think from the very beginning, as a teenager, when I first started to notice that I was attracted to guys instead of girls, the cultural scripts that I think a lot of guys can adopt very easily and maybe unthinkingly, I could not, right? Mm-hmm. And so from the very beginning, I have had to investigate gender, masculinity, and what that means for me. And I really struggled with it because I was a pretty feminine guy. I was a pretty feminine kid, just naturally. Now I am bearded and in my late 30s, and my joke is that I can pass as straight as long as I don't move and I don't talk. The moment I talk and the moment I move, everyone just clocks me as gay, right? But I was far more just naturally and overtly gay back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
and so that femininity just kind of emerged from me very easily, and I was drawn to androgyny. I was drawn to, I think, what would often be called gender fluid or non-binary today.
Right.
I did not have that language back in the day. And so I really deeply struggled with, okay, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be a male right now?
Right.
And what I settled on, one of my friends who was a woman at the time, wonderful person named Melinda Wilson, and she was kind of like a rocker and a drummer, which was kind of also outside of the norm for gender. And she said, I am not made masculine because I play the drums. I make the drums feminine because I'm the one playing them. And I really adopted that for myself, where I am not made feminine by my interests, by homosexuality, by all. I make those things masculine because I'm the one doing them. Because I have a pretty, despite my gender, expression growing up, I've always had a strong gender identity of being a man, of being male, and I bestow that upon what I do. Right, I bestow that masculinity upon everything I do, even if it is not stereotypically male. So I've been mired in the gender debates my whole life. I've been mired in debates in religious communities about homosexuality my whole life. So I think it was pretty baked in from the beginning for me,
right,
of trying to figure this stuff out.
I've heard that from a lot of gay men, that they have had a lifelong internal and sometimes external discussion about what it means to be a man and masculinity. And it's interesting because I don't hear that often from straight men. Yeah. Have you ever figured out, A, have you seen that? And B, if you have seen that, have you ever come to any conclusions about the difference in that discussion internally and externally?
Yeah. So I have 100% observed it. I have friends who are some of my dearest friends, guys who I love with my entire heart. And it's interesting because I will bring something up about my having to navigate, take, for example, male circles, all male spaces. And I right now I live basically like exclusively in man land, right? Most of my friends are male. I'm in a number of all male spaces. I'm partnered with a man. The gay male world is all men, right? But navigating those spaces as a gay man has an extra wrinkle, because I will come up against straight guys' fears. I've had to cultivate some really hard boundaries and in that space. And I talk about this with guys, and they're like, I've never had to deal with that, and I've never had to navigate that, and I've never had to figure out masculinity in that way, in this context. And so I 100% see it. And I think it's just one of the benefits of being, you use the term mindful masculinity. I think mindfully gay is an additional wrinkle there. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're at peace today with your definition of masculinity?
No. And and the reason I say that is because I think that masculinity is similar to religion, only insofar as, and I've spent a lot of my online work as a religious writer for over a decade, and that was the primary focus of my work. Religion is squishy, because the more you hone in on it, it gets harder and harder and harder to define it. It really only has clarity at a distance. We can look at Presbyterians and say, oh, that's a religion. We can look at Roman Catholicism and say that's a religion. But it's like the more granular you get, the less I'm forgetting the word, but the less clear it becomes in terms of well, what is religion, and the boundaries are pretty mushy. And I think masculinity is similar in that it gets more complicated the more we examine what masculinity is. And I've read a number of books just for my Substack, trying to define what masculinity is. And so on the one hand, it's a mushy category. And on the other hand, I do intuitively believe that there is such a thing as masculinity. And I say that because I'm gay and I'm very attracted to masculinity, right?
Right.
I'm androphilic. I love masculinity. And so I feel an attraction to a very real thing, right? It feels very real. On the other hand, trying to define that thing is very challenging. And so for me, what I do is I just kind of abdicate that entire process. And instead, what I do personally is I ask, okay, what does it mean to be a good human? So I start with what I believe are the two most important pillars of any human identity, of any person, which is I'm a human first, and that in a liberal society means that I am a beneficiary of fundamental human rights, fundamental dignity, respect, and equality. Some could call that being made in the image of God. Others will frame it differently, right? So I have that fundamental shared humanity that connects me to all other humans, and that is our most important collective identity. And then on the other hand, there is my identity as an individual. And so, and my unique constitution, my unique experiences, and how I navigate the world as an individual. And these are the two most important poles of anyone's identity. Now, in the middle, there's all that other stuff. There is gender, race, nationality, sex, orientation, religion, all of the vast spectrum of identity categories. What I often believe happens is that people get mired in that stuff, and it gets elevated above the two most important identities, our shared humanity and our unique individuality. And when that order gets messed up, then bad things follow, right? Atrocities follow in human history, right? When we elevate someone's identity above their humanity and individuality. But also, I think it results in failure for any movement that is striving for recognition and acceptance, right? The reason the gay rights movement was so successful and the reason the civil rights movement was so successful is because essentially they said, we're just as human as you. Please include us in your vision of universal humanity and the rights and dignity that affords us. And so they succeeded not by emphasizing the differences, but rather by emphasizing our shared humanity. And that works. That really works. So what I do is I start with, I'm a human and I'm an individual. And what does it mean to be a human of integrity and dignity and virtue? Now, I'm also a man. And that gets, and what it means to be a person of virtue will look different for me as an individual and as a man, because being a man is part of my individual experience, and that will shift. That means that it will look slightly different from being a woman. So being a man means that I walk through this world with a different experience. There is testosterone flowing through my veins, which makes me predisposed to being more status sensitive in a lot of ways. I have greater upper body strength because just by merit of being male. That changes how I exist, and that makes demands of me as an individual for what it means to be a good human. It has to start with being an individual and
A shared humanity.
And shared humanity, and and what does it mean to be a good human? And then it all follows from there for me.
What I love about your framework is that it removes a lot of this nonsense where we're trying to negotiate what part of being a good human is more of a male or a female. So, a lot of people get into these ridiculous debates about the nature of nurture. As a Roman Catholic, in my adult life, I started teaching religious ed for confirmation classes for 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And I was considered one of the most nurturing teachers out of my parish. I was not excluded from expressing that part of me just because I was a man. It's not like it's the exclusive domain of a female. Right. And that's what I really love about your framework. You sort of strip down those boundaries and say, what are the things about being a good human that all of us have the power to express based on what we want to be? What do you want to do? How conscious are you of those behaviors, those traits that you can go be that person?
Yeah, exactly right. I take the approach that it starts with our values, right? What do I think is the good and beautiful and true? And for me, I'm partial to Stoicism. I love philosophical Stoicism. And I love how the Stoics said virtue is the greatest good, right? And all else are preferred or dispreferred indifference in comparison to virtue. And to put that in kind of a modern parlance, that means it starts with our values. And so we have to start with, what are my values as a human and an individual? What does it mean to live with integrity every single day?
Right.
How do I live that? I think that's the chief question. That is the most important question. And
do you think, though, Stephen, that those virtues and what a man might consider virtuous is shaped not extremely, that's being a little bit too judgmental. It's subjectively chosen because of societal norms? Because I totally agree with you. What I find, especially online in dialectic and rhetoric from either writers or people I have conversations with, is those virtues seem to be very selective based on where that person's coming from as a man.
Yeah, absolutely. So and I actually wouldn't even use the word chosen. Culture and the online spaces that we inhabit, if we're not mindful of how we navigate the world, right, then we won't choose our values. But it's impossible to live life without values. We will go through life with values. The question is whether they are examined or not. That's the question. And none of us have a monopoly on truth, right? This is a collective effort. And that whole process is informed by culture and collective wisdom and,
some neurobiology.
Yeah, and neurobiology. I mean, and so it's complicated, right?
It's very complicated.
And I am aware that I think sometimes I've reinforced the men are this way, women are that way. And I think part of the reason why I've done that is because I'm just in the middle of figuring this out myself. And I do think that there are broad trends of slight differences between men and women that really matter. I think that they do manifest in the world. They shape culture. They do matter. And so trying to hold that on one hand and then hold individuality, every man is different. There are as many types of men as there are men in this world, and trying to hold that as well. And I don't know the balance between that. Right. I'm trying to figure that out.
Isn't that the discussion that we're currently having once again in this cycle of men are in crisis, men are not in crisis, men are in crisis? What we're trying to do is maybe lock down what is that balance?
Yes.
Where do we find that balance? And I have never been sure of what the balance looks like.
Yeah, I don't know if if a balance will ever really be discovered. I don't know. I think that this is one of those things where it's kind of like, what's the word? It's almost Talmudic, where, in Judaism, the kind of the point is the ongoing debate. And so
Yes.
the point,
so well put.
Right. That is the life of a lot of Judaism, is the debate, is the conversation itself. And so,
yeah.
But I don't know if we will ever hit like a ground truth. So yeah, the end result of all of this, though, is that I don't have something solid to latch on to of here's what it means to be a man. And there is some dissonance there. And I think my experience is similar to a lot of men's experience, where there's a lot of confusion about what it means to be a man. There are all of these contradictory messages about, well, what does it mean to be a man? You'll get one message from progressive spaces. You'll get another message from conservative spaces, from religious spaces. And a lot of people will say, well, just stop the debate. Just stop that internal monologue of, what does it mean to be a man? I think that there's wisdom to that, and I'm also not sure if the debate will stop. Right? I'm not sure that's feasible. So, and there is some challenging stuff in the progressive space where my trans brothers and sisters and siblings are basically celebrated and told you do have a strong gender identity, and you can double down on that, and you can transition, and so on and so forth. Whereas I feel like very often men are told you almost have to transcend your masculinity. That is a very confusing thing to see. And I think a lot of guys, even if they aren't consciously aware of contradictory messages, they feel it. Right. And that can be very disorienting.
I loved your metaphor of Talmudic. So I studied the Bible for 4 years with the New York Archdiocese. My parish participated in a program. We started off with like 24 people. By the time we finished 4 years later, I think there was only like 6 of us left, because it was intense. Thousands of hours of study, hundreds of hours of in-classroom with someone who was a Bible scholar. What I loved about learning about the Old Testament was how the rabbis, after the temple was destroyed and they had to go out in the diaspora, sort of recreate the temple in their own synagogues, that they started going down this path of exploration and examination. And what I learned from that was that all these wonderful passages in the Old Testament could be increasingly explored and understood through this constant process of examination. And I think that does relate, as you pointed out earlier, to what this whole debate over masculinity is, because it changes based on the norms. What Arthur Schlesinger wrote about in 1958 in Esquire magazine, when the first seminal modern history piece on masculinity was written. But since then, we've had this waxing and waning of masculinity and the discussion arising during the feminist movement. And men were now not just examining masculinity in sort of an objective vacuum. They were doing it in comparison to what women were going through. And then in the 90s, when we had this Derman Strong over masculinity, the evangelical community jumped on it. And, that kind of dominated the conversation for a couple of years. And so it's never been a discussion that was more sort of building on things and examining things. It was always like a movement of some kind that would take it over, and the examination stopped. Today, it seems like it's so dominated by don't be Andrew Tate. The manosphere is the thing you need to exclude from masculinity. And everybody's struggling with whatever we did or did not learn from these previous crises. It's like we don't have the rabbis who are building on the knowledge in an intelligent and mindful way to say, do you see that this didn't work, but this did? Are we closer to something that maximizes flourishing and minimizes suffering for men in society? I feel like we never really have that discussion. And I think that's why we're stuck.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that you're right that the primary message is don't be that guy to men, be it Andrew Tate or the show Adolescence, which was an incredible work of art, but not a great representation.
Powerful.
It was powerful, and it was not a great representation of incel culture and online culture. It was pretty fucking clueless when it came to the actual realities of online male culture. But the overriding message culturally from my fellow liberals and progressives is don't be that guy. Yeah. Do not be toxically masculine. Do not be Andrew Tate. The problem is that being a negative, a negative vision of reality is not a sufficient foundation to live a good life.
Right.
There needs to be a positive vision of what it means to be masculine, and what that will look like for the individual. And as long as the message is solely don't be that guy, guys can't do something with that. There's no next step of, okay, well, what is the positive vision that I can embrace? And I think that is deranging. You know, I wrote an article called "Are Men Needed as Men?" and what I observed in that article was that in a lot of spaces it feels like masculinity is real insofar as it is toxic. There is something very real, and I get this message from people who say, well, you need to relinquish the notion of what it means to be masculine altogether. The problem that I see here is simultaneously these exact same people are really doubled down on there is something very real, and it's called toxic masculinity. And I think that a lot of men are searching for what it means to be a man, and then they go to the Jordan Petersons. They go to the Andrew Tates. They go to online spaces that will give them a vision of what that means. And so Caitlin Flanagan in The Atlantic tried to posit heroic masculinity as the counter to toxic masculinity, or I've seen the term tonic masculinity in response to toxic masculinity. I think that there's a difference between what we would like as the ideal, which is, guys should just cast this whole discussion off. And then I think that there's just the reality we live in, which is young men are going to try to figure this out. And a vision of don't be this is not sufficient for them to find a way in life.
So to bring this full circle to something you said at the very beginning, when we talk about virtues that are just human. So right now, Scott Galloway is doing the rounds on his book tour, and he thinks that we can save boys and men if they strive to be providers, protectors, and procreators. And I totally buy in to Scott's theory that providing is a good thing. And there's many ways that you can provide. Protecting is a good thing. And again, there's many ways that you can be a protector. And when he says procreator, he doesn't necessarily mean a man siring a child, because he says some people are not made out for that. And so being an uncle, being a mentor, big brothers, big sisters is another procreator behavior or action. So what I'm wondering is anybody taking kind of Scott's mentality and driving it more towards, that's not a masculine trait. These are traits we need to be better humans. Have you come across anybody who's doing that well?
I think in their own flawed and limited capacity, a lot of the modern Stoics and modern secular Buddhists are doing this, where Donald Robertson and Ryan Holiday and those guys, they're not above criticism, to be clear. They're problems.
We all are. We all are.
None of us are above criticism. And I think a lot of those guys, to their credit, they emphasize universal human virtues, and they also really appeal to men, right? And so putting wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance at the center, at kind of keeping that front of mind, and doing the evening moral examine every day, where before bed you ask, in the words of Epictetus, where have I erred? Where have I succeeded? What have I left undone?
Right.
And to
the Jesuits do that at night.
Yes, and yeah, exactly. And so there's the Jesuit examine. There are different forms of this. There's the fearless moral inventory and the 12 steps. There's Seneca's and Epictetus's advice to do a moral examination each night. And I think what we run into with visions of masculinity is what I call archetypal possession. Archetypal possession is a term from Jungian psychology, and I don't think of it in the kind of mystical Jungian terms that he does, but archetypal possession is when a vision or an archetype possesses us and ends up hurting us because it does not match our circumstances. So what happens when a man cannot be provider but needs to be provided for? What happens when...
Is he no longer a man?
Is he no longer a man? That's right. What happens when he needs help? What happens when he is an addict and which is an experience that I have had? What happens when he is so low that he is the one who needs to be held,
right,
and needs to be cared for? If a guy becomes archetypally possessed by Scott Galloway's vision, there's a possibility that will block him from following other virtues.
Yeah.
The virtue of compassion means compassion for oneself. The virtue of courage means when a man is really low, speaking from his heart and speaking from that pain and acknowledging that pain. And I have really struggled with this because
I have too.
Yeah, and I have bipolar disorder, which means that I have been in positions in life where I've had to realize the most courageous thing that I can do is ask for help. The most courageous thing I can do is ask my friends and my partner to hold me. And which is why I think it's really important to think less about what it means to be masculine. And when we do, we need to hold that lightly. I think it's great. I think it's great to ask, what does it mean to be a man? But we need to think of higher values than that. What are higher values that can help us navigate being a man and not fall into archetypal possession? Because if I followed the protector, provider, procreator, if I followed that to a T and that's what it means to be a man, there's a chance that would hinder me in asking for help, in being courageous and wise when I am at my lowest. And that's my worry about that.
I have fallen into that rabbit hole, Stephen.
Me too.
And, to some degree, I'm living through it again in my life. So maybe the third or fourth time. And with all of the norms that have been presented to me about what is a man and how does he derive self-worth, it is so ingrained in me that asking for help is not natural for me. And at times feels uncomfortable for me. And I love the way you just phrased this, because I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we see, when Scott Galloway does his interviews, he spews out all this stuff. What percent of men are in prison? If you go to a morgue, what percent of the people committed suicide are men? Men struggling to go to college, men struggling. Well, so much of that is because we're living with norms that prevent us from being courageous and saying, I need help.
Yeah, 100%. And being able to see, like, if I want to be courageous and strong right now, that means I have to be weak, and I have to accept that I'm being weak. And sometimes strength feels exactly like weakness, right? And For me, it has been such it feels like pulling teeth to ask for help. I mean, just being 100% honest. It feels like I would rather be vivisected than ask for help because it's so deeply ingrained in me. And
Yeah.
and what started to change that for me was when I went to a men's group. I was in a very, very, very dark place. And I woke up one morning and I realized I need help. I need something. I need to do something. I need community. So and I was texting with a combat veteran of mine, and he said, "You will never be ready to use your voice. You will never be ready, which is why you just have to do it. You will never be ready to ask for help. If you keep waiting until you're ready, you will never do it. So just do it." And that's what I did. And so I went to a men's group and I used my voice and I asked for help. I told them I want to die. I don't know how to get through another day. And they responded, and also my male friends responded with such compassion and such gentleness. And the healing balm came from other men who showed me it is not cowardly, it is not weak to ask for help. And that because I felt weak. And I hate feeling weak. I still hate feeling weak. I like to feel like a badass. And when I finally opened up to my closest male friends, to Kinsman and David and all of the guys who I really love and who really love me, they affirmed the courage that it took to do that. And that is when I think I started to really experientially understand, because it came from other men. And so I think it's important, based on my own experience, it's important to receive the validation from other men that not always being procreator, provider, and protector does not make you unmasculine. It just makes you human. And
Do you feel, Stephen, that you have needed to experience that, what you experienced through the retreat, and then as you started to have conversations with men, how do you think you've evolved as a person who can ask for help?
Yeah, it's practice, right? It's almost like physical therapy, where you have these exercises and that you need to do daily or weekly, and then eventually the body adapts and the body strengthens, right? But it isn't a one-time deal. It's an ongoing practice, because those tapes go really deep. That wiring goes really deep, and it takes time to undo what took a lifetime to implant, right?
We could probably go on forever.
Yes, yeah, we have
because
so
I
much
connect
more
with
to talk about.
I connect with you in a way that I connect with so few people, let alone men. But I do want to try to wrap this up in something of a gift for everybody. Here we are, a couple of days before Thanksgiving, the beginning of the holiday season, and hopefully a season of generosity. Tell me the one major gift you think, in your exploration, your examination of masculinity and what it means to be a man, what's the one biggest gift you've given yourself? And what do you think that's the gift you would love most for every other man to receive? I caught you off guard. I'm sorry.
No. It's great. It's a big question. The first thing that comes to mind is I have given myself the permission to be human. And so much of my life as a man has been riddled with self-loathing, because confronting my weakness, be it through addiction and recovery, or be it through bipolar, or be it through challenging life experiences where there have been times of my life where it's just like I don't have at time, in my 20s, like I don't have a fucking job. Like I'm trying so hard to get through. I feel like a complete loser. And the ability to look back on that young man and just feel compassion for him and be like, I love that dude. He is a human being worthy of compassion, and it's okay that he's human. It's okay that he struggles, and being able to give that to myself, being able to give that to my past self, to that really troubled teenage kid and really troubled young guy in his 20s trying to figure his shit out, and being able to give it to myself right now, in my present life now as a 37-year-old man, just giving myself the permission to be human. And part of being human is being a fuck up, right? Part of being a human is being a disaster, and it's fine. It is okay. And the appropriate response is compassion. I think that is the most important gift that I have given myself as a man, as a human, and it's also the most important gift that I think other people in my life have given me.
I again, the symbiosis I feel with you right now. The first time I went through serious therapy only for myself, not couples therapy, the woman who was my therapist, between my 5th and 6th meeting with her, after listening to me talk about my childhood, my marriage, work, asking me some questions, she gave me an assignment, and the 6th meeting was going to be our last. And she said, and it was a weekly session, so I would go every Tuesday night, I think. And so she said, Rich, between now and the next time, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and stand in front of a mirror, and I want you to make sure you lock eyes with yourself. And what you need to say to that person in the mirror is, I'm a good man. She didn't instruct me to be compassionate towards myself. She didn't, tell me like this is the goal or the behavior or emotion I want you to grant to Richard. She did it in a much more subtle way. Because the first time I stood in front of that mirror, it was almost impossible to not look away, to say those words to myself. So I had to say it in the morning before I went to work, and at night when the kids were asleep and I had some privacy. And sure enough, over time, between that and the next meeting, I could look in that mirror and say it without hesitation. I had to give myself, as you just said, I had to say, Rich, you're a fuck up, or your life's fucked up right now, or whatever, but you're still a good man. That became my mantra. So that whenever someone would do something to me and I would start to judge myself based on their impressions of me, I would go off and use my mantra, Rich, you're still a good man. And it is something I still work on today, Stephen. At times it can come naturally, depending upon what's in my life. And at other times, it's a crush to do it. And so I really appreciate the fact that that's what you locked in on, because I agree with you. I think that's the biggest gift a man can give himself, is to say, I'm a good person. We all need to work on things. And I don't want someone to gloss over their being cruel to others or diminishing someone's flourishing. I mean, we need to be objective enough and mindful enough to not kid ourselves. But I think the overwhelming majority of us are good men, are good humans. And we just need to give ourselves permission to accept that.
Yes, absolutely. 100% agree.
I thank you so much for your time. What I tell every guest on Mindful Masculinity is, my dad, when I was a teenage boy, said to me, Richard, there's only one thing in life that you can never make more of. You can lose all your money and still make it back. You can lose all your love and still make it back. You will never regain a second of your life that you give. You just gave me about an hour of your life, and I just wanted to let you know how grateful I am that you did that.
You too. This was really wonderful. Thank you for your hospitality and for giving me your time.
Well, thank you for your presence. And I hope this is not the last time you and I get to do this, because this subject is so diverse and you have so much to offer that I'm really eager to continue this conversation.
Yeah, let's do it. Anytime.
Let's do it.
All right.
Stephen, happy Thanksgiving.
You too.